Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. That was loud. Good afternoon. I'm Ben Maku, political and energy reporter at Politico. Europe's climate agenda is entering a new political phase. After years of ambitious Green Deal legislation, attention is shifting toward industrial competitiveness and regulatory simplification. Many governments and industries argue that administrative burdens and rising energy prices are undermining Europe's economic competitiveness. But critics and environmental groups warn that simplification can quickly become deregulation. So today, we'll be discussing whether Europe can maintain its climate ambitions while adapting to economic realities and what the future might look like for key policies such as the ETS, CBAM, and the IAA. With me today is Arthur Corbin, business advisor in the cabinet of Executive Vice President Stéphane Séjourné. You focus on the Industrial Accelerator Act. It's a key file supporting Europe's decarbonization goals. Patricia Heidegger, Deputy Secretary General of the European Environmental Bureau. You fight to keep environmental safeguards in Europe's climate policy. And Stepan Černý, Ambassador at Corpair 1 in the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the European Union. Your country is leading the fight on ETS exemptions to shield heavy manufacturers from paying heavy prices. Now, let's get right to it. And actually, I'm going to start with you, Ambassador, right out of the gate. I got to ask you, your country has been particularly critical of ETS in recent days and weeks. And I'm wondering, there's a review coming, as we all know, of the ETS in July. If it stays in July, we all know that that also could be extended, so who knows? What do you want in this review to make your country happy?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for a very interesting question. Of course, our government has been quite critical of the fact that over the past couple of years, the climate ambition was there to just basically be a priority over any other policy objective of the European Union, and we think that that was an element of our policy making here in the EU that of course makes sense from the environmental perspective, but should be maybe broadened because the challenges facing our union, which we hold dear, are quite manifold, and therefore in order to maintain industrial competitiveness, economic competitiveness as a whole, I think we need to have a sort of a marriage of convenience between maintaining the climate ambition, because climate change exists, it's real, and it's man-made, and man has to do something about that. But on the other hand, let's not use the climate ambition as a tool which overwhelms anything else we have to do. Right now, there's a political consensus that we need to tackle competitiveness as well, and also we have to face the security challenges of the European Union at the same time. Therefore, to have a rational, not ideological, from any side of the spectrum debate about our climate ambitions and their impact on competitiveness is, I think, the right thing to do. And we are using, of course, this panel as well, but any other tools at our disposal to have this quite fact-based and unideological debate.
You put out a non-paper last week, which essentially asked for exemptions for heavy industry. Is this something, and also actually I should say, a freezing of the benchmarks at 2021 to 2025. Is this something that you're imploring the Commission do?
Definitely, definitely. We sense that we have a very good interlocutor in the Commission, and here I think that it's reasonable to say that there is also now a broader sense of ownership of the industrial competitiveness agenda within the Member States and the Council. And what you're aiming at, of course, this is what we are putting on the table as a sort of a beginning of a debate. We know that there are different views in the Council. We know that there are different needs by different industries. But what we are trying to foster and what we're starting to start is to start this debate about whether the targets we've set to ourselves in reality almost 5 years ago, and we negotiated them 4 years ago, are up to date, whether they are really aligned with the needs of the industry and the society as a whole. And I think we had a very, very interesting competitiveness council last week where we were in this push. We were joined from different perspectives by a large set of member states, and we are perfectly happy with this result, that we can have this open debate with the member states and the Commission as well.
I see you nodding a lot. Arthur, what are you thinking?
Thanks for inviting me today. I'm super happy, and we were joking about this, but I'm a bit seated in the punching bag. I'm a punching bag, so I have to react to that. No, many things were said, but if we take a step back, ETS, did it work? Did it not work? How do you assess that? For the past years, if you look at it, ETS enabled to reduce 50% of the emission of the covered sectors. That's a fact. Then we need also to look at what industries covered are actually telling us. First is that ahead of the review or within the current discussion on the benchmarks, you have different streams where you need to look at things. First is on the benchmarks. The proposal was made by my colleagues from DG Clima after several discussions in the Commission. The proposal that was made was already providing quite an amount of flexibility compared to the situation before, in particular for the chemical industry, but not only. The issue with this proposal is related to the fallbacks. And here, in the Council, we note that there are diverse elements, but there is a growing concern, and it's a fact that was said at the last Competitiveness Council. Some wants to freeze, and some wants to have a, and that's the latest proposal that was made, a targeted amendment as part of the next ETS review in order to deal with those benchmarks in a specific way, retroactively. This was made Thursday. Now we need to look at things we did not discuss in the Commission. DG Clima is lead on this, and I think there is also something to take into account, is that there is a legal reality that we need to take into account. Things need to be legally sound. That's for the benchmarks, and if I provide a full picture. And by the way, with the legal proposal, we proposed a temporary fund in order to help the sectors for which we could not provide a solution that could go further as requested by some industry. And I think this was also an important one. Then you have the ETS review in general that arrives in July. Yes, it enabled to work on the reduction of the CO2 emissions over the past years, but did it enable to reduce the emissions, let's say, seemingly across all sectors? Not sure. Second, it is perceived as a tax and not as a tool for investment. And third, there is a greater need for flexibility, and that's what we have been receiving and hearing from a lot of sectors. First point. Flexibility, I think that it will need to match also the 2040. You started by saying, are we coming back on everything? Are we rolling back on everything? We are the only regions of the world to have a 2040 target. And it's not an unambitious one. It is something. It is something. It is something. We can discuss.
There's been discussion about that being extended.
About?
2040. Are we going to keep the 2040, or we're going to have?
That's the first time I hear this. Let's be honest, that's the first time. We just validated things. We have a 2040 target. It includes several flexibilities, as we know. Then we will need how this reflects in the ETS. Second, it's about the earmarking. What we've been hearing is that 95% actually of the money is not going back to the industry that is actually paying. Is this a normal situation? We can understand that some industries are actually unhappy about this. Third, it's ETS. We always think about the ETS for industry. You have also aviation and maritime that you need to take into account, and that's an important element. Fourth, it's how do you make sure that you create really a mirror between the ETS and the CBAM. On the CBAM, we've done some stuff in the past, temporary solution in December, downstream, 190 products, steel and aluminium, anti-circumvention, simplification. We removed 90% of the guys in the scope, and it only affects 1%. Simplification can be very good sometimes, let's not forget that. And then the fifth point is how do you transform ETS in order to make sure that it's not perceived as a tax anymore. We need to work on this, but we need to make sure that for industry guys that are willing to invest, they don't see this ETS entering their OPEX, and then we provide support in CAPEX. It does not work in their balance sheet. And I think this is how we should support them and how to try to find a way to deal with this situation currently.
Commissioner Hoekstra did say, I think last week or the week before, that one of the things in the review that could be included is a section of ETS payments going to business. Is that not something that, was that something you'd support?
That's, I think, the third pillar. It's earmarking going back. 95% are going elsewhere. And I think that's something that the president said, that Mr. Hoekstra said, that Teresa Ribera, vice president, said in the plenary, and that there is a growing consensus among the Commission that we need to make sure that the industry, when it decarbonizes and when it invests, it can also see some money flooding back.
And one thing I wanted to ask too, on the benchmarks, it did take a little while for them to come out, a little bit longer than expected. There was this waiting period. Is this because there was a lot of debate on how to make everyone happy, or what was, if you can bring me into that discussion?
Well, when you sit in the Commission, seat, can you really have the objective to make everyone happy? That's no, but that's a reality. That's EU, that's compromise, etc. Yes, there were several discussions internally. We've been trying to also assess what was feasible and what could we deal with. And I think the proposal now was informally sent to member states, and now we need to see how we take this forward.
Patricia, do you hear a lot of this and think that this is just rolling back environmental legislation?
Yeah, thank you very much for having us on this panel and at the forum. Yeah, indeed, I'd like to start with a really simple point here. We're quite concerned about this debate about climate simplification and the wider kind of simplification agenda in general, because it's quite often not about simplification. I think it's much bigger. It's really about political direction, the political direction that we're giving at the moment. A lot of what's been labeled as simplification risks becoming something completely different. We've seen deregulation, we've seen substantial delays and factually slower and lower standards. And we believe that these are exactly the wrong signals that are needed for investors, the wrong signals for industry, and also the wrong signals for people. What we need right now in Europe is clarity and confidence, and what we're creating is uncertainty. So what we've been arguing, what Europe needs right now is that we should do away with this narrative of Europe having too much climate policy, which becomes a bit of a dominant narrative these days. The real problem really is too little implementation, too slow implementation of what we already have, a lack of investment, as we all know, and also, of course, still a lack of too little social support. So there's a current estimate that we're losing around 180 billion euros every year because we're not properly implementing the environmental and climate legislation that we already have. So if you put that into comparison with what the Commission has promised us and industry, I think a two-digit billion euro amount of savings every year, you see a big difference between what we're losing every year because we're not going forward fast enough with implementation and what we're trying to save here. But they're even much bigger figures, if you allow me to go a bit beyond the climate discussion. So for instance, another big topic, and we've been talking about the Competitiveness Council, where the chemicals industry had a very privileged role last week. The Commission itself, for instance, has estimated that by 2050, pollution with forever chemicals, or PFAS, might cost us 1.7 trillion euros. Climate inaction is, again, with figures from the institutions, predicted to cost us 5.6 trillion euros by 2050. So we really believe that this is not about ideology, it's about really hard figures, financial and economic figures, that have nothing to do with ideology. So for us, the question really is at the moment, how do we simplify climate policy? The question really is, how do we make it work better, faster, and fairly? We also believe, and I think there's a lot of scientific evidence for that, much of which is also produced by the Commission's own intelligence, that strong climate policy is really our economic security strategy these days. By delays, we're just postponing the problem. The problem at the end is not too much regulation. The problem for most of our industries is a lack of affordable energy. We are only prolonging the problem if we're continuing to lock ourselves into spending literally billions of euros on fracked gas from the US, or still supporting Russia by buying gas from Russia. So we're just prolonging the problem that we have. So we believe that the real competitiveness risk is inaction and continued dependency on fossil fuels from the US, from Russia, and from the Middle East. Also, many businesses are not asking for deregulation. They're really asking for predictability, a clear direction of travel. They need affordable, reliable energy. They need infrastructure. They need skilled people, motivated people. They need research and innovation, and they need political stability and leadership. So we really believe that there is a big risk in now kind of opening not just climate files, but across the board environmental and climate legislation that we have just adopted and sometimes not even started to implement, and now we're already reopening things. And I think that's also really not what our industries and our investors need at the moment. Political instability is really far more damaging than regulatory burdens. Just to finish with because you already went straight into the ETS debate. I mean, ETS 1, I mean, you already mentioned there's very clear evidence on what it has brought. It has also had the effect of saving our industry. I think it's 100 billion cubic meters of gas use, which is giving them now more security and stability in yet another fossil fuel crisis that we are facing. So it has already proven to be an instrument that actually helps our industries to become more resilient. So further delays are really not what we need right now.
Elsa, you look like you want to jump in there.
A couple of elements, because we often hear the simplification process that we are doing at the Commission. I went back to prepare, and I looked at the 10 omnibuses, and we always think, the omnibus that we have proposed, the fleet of omnibus that we've proposed, etc. It's a rolling back. Actually, the first one, if you look at CSRD, CSDDD, yes, it's simplification. Some say it's deregulation, etc. The second one, it's InvestEU. That's how we have done a real top-up to InvestEU in order to accelerate the transition. Then it's about the small mid-cap definition. It's another how do we help startup scale-up and the scale-up to actually perform in Europe. A lot of scale-up in Europe are related to clean tech. So that's also something that is actually quite positive in the sense. Then a lot of totally irrelevant to climate. You have the one on defense, you have the one on food and feed, I think, at the end. So I just want to balance this, and then there is also the environmental permitting that we are reopening. That's a reality. If I've asked several industries and non-industry players to share with us, okay, now you are opening a new factory, which is very good for the climate, which is in the automotive industry, in the clean tech, etc. What do you have to do? Well, this is complex. You have to realize that this is really complex, and a bit in simplification on the permitting, I think, can be also very good in order to continue and to accelerate to do the decarbonization in Europe. Second point, I fully agree. In Europe, and the Iran war shows it perfectly, we have to decarbonize. It's not only a matter of decarbonization, reducing the CO2, it's a question of sovereignty. If you look at the energy prices across Europe, countries who have a high share of fossil-free energy mix are actually resisting way better to the crisis. That's a fact. And then we need to deploy the clean tech in order to decarbonize, and this is the IAA. The IAA is the proposal in order to be sovereign on the energy part, but also on the future clean tech that are needed, and they need to be deployed in Europe. Because I think, and the specific debate on Friday at the college shows it, there is a growing concern that the clean tech could only be a Chinese success story. And I think we are providing a clear answer with the IAA that it is not the case. And we have the possibility still to act in Europe, as we have a lot of leaders in those areas. So that was the 2 points that I wanted to make.
Stefan, I want to ask you a little bit about the Competitiveness Council last week, because it does seem like there seems to be more of a growing consensus about ETS and decarbonization in general among member states. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it's very, very, very correct to assess in that way. And also I would like to just clarify that at the Competitiveness Council, no one puts the ETS as a system into question. It has good results. We've reduced the emission over the past couple of decades. The question is that whether it's all the elements within the ETS, and specifically ETS1, of course, are really fit for purpose. And I understand the need for clarity for investment, and I totally agree with that. But of course, we are working in a sort of a political environment and sort of a political process. So we cannot really rule out the fact that we need to have really broad political ownership by both the member states and the European Parliament about what we're doing in climate policies. And the long-term signals are there. No one is questioning the 2030 and 2050 target, and the 2040 target is law of the land as well. And I think in very, very balanced way. In a way, it was a delicate compromise between the member states and the Parliament, but it's the law of the land. And right now, we need to work on the different stepping stones, how to reach these targets, taking into account that we've already done quite a lot. We need to have investment stability for the companies, but we also need to make sure that by adopting climate policies and raising the ambition, we are not destroying some industries which we need because of security reasons, because of tax sovereignty reasons, because of the fact that it's just maybe a bit cheaper to buy the stuff elsewhere than in Europe, but it's definitely strategically unwise to be reliant on importers from outside of the EU. And of course, China comes to mind, but not only China. To be completely honest with you, we need to build our industrial base in Europe, and we need to focus on the way how the investment, which is necessary, be it government interventions, but of course private sector investment is necessary as well, how these investments are spent wisely within the EU. And here I think the debate about the EU preference made in EU, of course, has to take place in all honesty, in all understanding that this is a significant, could be a significant opportunity for European investment to look at that. I think the investment has to be tied to honest and specific decarbonization efforts by the company, so that we are not spending money on investment which will then end up somewhere in not clean tech or somewhere not in the EU. And I, of course, quite appreciate the fact that you're working with the ETS as that it should not be perceived as a tax, which goes to the general budget, and then we finance pensions or whatever from the ETS, but the ETS has to be diverted back into industries. And therefore, I think now, even if it may seem a bit controversial in the Competitiveness Council, I think most of the member states and the Commission are working in the same direction, and need to have this kind of open dialogue about where are the interfaces which can be dealt with. And I of course understand that the regulation is a sort of a threat, perceived by some of the threat, but I don't really see the simplification process as being too much of a deregulation. I think there are areas, for instance, in the free movement of people in the EU, where the regulation should be taking place, but this is not the debate we are having right now. And in general, the simplification process is this sort of a political corrective mechanism. We've done something in the past. Let's look at it, whether we've done the right thing, whether it's actually working, whether it's not too much of an administrative burden at times where we don't really have the opportunity to afford any, and to have a rather streamlined political process between the Commission, Council and Parliament to just look into, to have some feedback from the stakeholders whether we're doing the right thing.
So is it really just about selling this to local like your citizens? Because it does seem like for example, competitiveness is now taken over for Green Deal. Green Deal seems to be something that's been kind of lost. Patricia, I want to ask you this, because Stepan mentioned that it might be a perception of taking some ETS payments and putting them into social programs. You had a pretty interesting take on that, and I wanted to get you to talk about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, it has been extremely important already at the very outset of the European Green Deal that we have credible policy integration between kind of social objectives and rapid phase out of CO2 emissions and all other environmental pieces of legislation. And it was a bit of a shortcoming of the European Green Deal that the, let's say, social policy component was not entirely convincing and probably also not communicated sufficiently. So we believe that ETS as a system, it's just a piece of the puzzle. It's never been the silver bullet to decarbonizing our region, but it's an important piece of the puzzle, and especially with ETS2. it's also giving us an important source of income that can be and must be reinvested also in addressing the social challenges that we have. The Social Climate Fund is extremely important as an instrument. The member states some have already done the job, some are still working on the national plans on how they will be using the revenues. The Commission is currently reviewing them. I understand from a recent debate with the Commission that a lot of member states are putting forward really good ideas, mostly focusing on electrification of transportation, affordable housing, etc. So I think at the current moment where we see this very unhealthy polarization between climate and environmental objectives and social objectives and economic objectives, it's extremely important that, especially at member state level, because that's not so much for the Commission, but it's really for implementation at national level, that people on the ground see concrete changes in terms of policies, in terms of investment, in terms of direct returns to their pockets, where they see the impacts of the energy crisis, for instance, or the housing crisis. So I think there's some very positive developments happening now at national level. We need to make sure that these revenues are 100% invested in, into the right things. And that people on the ground really feel a change, because I mentioned already the housing crisis, which is something that is very real to people across the region, and I think many people are not convinced that current policies are sufficiently taking their concerns into account. So this instrument is really important, but of course there's other current policies being rolled out around renovation, for instance, where we also have to make sure that the massive investments that we are making and that have been committed into renovation and affordable housing come with the right incentives. For instance, where public funding is going into also supporting private investors into housing, that there's the right conditionalities and the right protections, for instance, for people renting their apartments who otherwise have very little say. So there's other parallel, really important discussions that are going on that need to be seen as parallel developments.
Also, I'm sure you want to talk about the Industrial Accelerator Act.
But not only. I think that the Green Deal was about the setting standards. That's a reality. That's fact. That's what happened. The Clean Industrial Deal is about the deployment. And now we are in deployment at scale. If you look, one example, or two, but if you look, when you set the conditions right, actually the market can overperform. Look at the Iran crisis. Everyone was saying nothing is available in terms of battery electric cars, plug-in hybrids, not enough demand, nothing on the second-hand market, no infrastructure. For the past, since the beginning of the year, and especially for the past 3 months, the sales, and so the market, is actually overperforming any standard that we could have thought to implement. That's a reality. When there is a clear market signal, which is here the price going up, then things are there. And look at things. I think that between the time that when we set the standard in the Green Deal, what did our European car makers do? They increased their capacity, but not a little, significantly. If you look at, they are going to put on the market this year and next year 200 new vehicles. Battery electrics. So it's even more if you take a plug-in hybrid. 200 new. That's only the European manufacturers. If you look at Volkswagen, I really like these figures because it shows what is it to scale up. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they were producing 200,000 BEVs in Europe, so battery electrics. They are at 850. They are scaling up, they have invested, and they are moving forward. If you take Renault, they are proposing very affordable battery electric cars that are made in Europe as well. The R5, the R4, etc. Things are there. We are moving. The question is not, we spend too much start on the standards, and we should spend much more time into how to make sure that in the value chains we deploy massively. And in order to deploy massively, you need to simplify things. That's what we hear a lot, and that's what we should focus on in the next years to come, because it will enable to go faster than just having the standards. That's what we think.
On the IAA,
yeah.
What do you think it can do, not just for decarbonization in Europe, but also for the perception of it? in Europe?
Well, on the IAA, we need, what I can say today, it can be actually completely different in 9 months, because who would have bet 9 months ago that in the industry council last week, almost all member states would agree on having such a tool? No one. I would have not that bet. I think no one would have bet. It's needed, it was needed, but who would have bet? No one. Germany moved as a general support of the tool, like many other member states. This is good, and I think we are at the time where citizens, and that's also what they told us during the last elections, is that they did not say enough with the green agenda. We don't want any climate action anymore. They just say, we want climate action, but we also want it in a different way. We want to see it affordable, and we want to see it as strengthening the European value chains. And I think that's the message that they've sent. The IAA is actually here in order to make sure that we are strengthening European value chains while decarbonizing. If we don't have it, there is a risk, big risk, that most of the, let's say, growth, green growth, as some would call this, are actually good for other people outside Europe and China, but not only. I think India is really betting a lot on this, and we are aware of this particularly as well. So we are at this time where we need to make sure that our trade policy, our industry policy, and our decarbonization policy are doing an intersection, and in order to deliver for the European value chains. And I think that's what the IAA is actually trying to do, focusing on several activities or several value chains, clean tech, automotive, and some others, but it's targeted. We already hear, and I think that's one thing of the Council last week, that some member states are willing to add more, because they feel that the pressure is being so important on several value chains that the IAA should be a bit reinforced. We will see what the discussion will be, but that's also what we hear. So from a situation where we were standard setter and no enabling conditions or very few, we are building actually a much more industrial policy for the first time with the accompanying elements. Value chain approach, upstream, downstream, some financing elements, some degree of openness because it's European DNA, some degree of protections because that's the world we live in today.
On that note, thank you very much, all of you, for being here. It was a great discussion. And thank you all for this fascinating discussion. Next up, my colleagues Marco Antonio Berti, Chiara Rinaldi, and intelligence analysts of Politico will discuss the politics of the environmental omnibus. See you around.